केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ रे दिल झूमे देखो मतवारा हुआ रे केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार विमल बोलो जुबान केसरी
The Newshour Special Edition.
Good evening and a very warm welcome. You're watching the Newshour Special Edition. I'm Prathibha. Thank you for joining us. And viewers, the big story today is that the talks have failed in Islamabad. United States is now preparing to resume the war in the Middle East. The world is watching quite closely as the situation could soon spiral out of control completely. But many are now wondering today, is the United States getting ready to strike Iran once again only because they got their strategy all wrong when the war began in the first place? Did the United States not realize that Iran could weaponize the Strait of Hormuz? Now, Donald Trump has now announced that the United States would undertake a mission to determine and completely cut off the Strait of Hormuz. It won't allow any ships to pass through until the strait is completely demined. But did the United States send the entire global energy market into a complete tizzy solely due to a miscalculation on part of the United States? Now, what has further raised questions is the real intent behind this entire war. In his latest post on Truth Social, Donald Trump has in fact said that the only point that mattered in the talks in Islamabad was the nuclear program. This is a claim that has been made by Trump himself. The only thing that matters is the nuclear program by Iran. And he said that Iran did not agree to the conditions posed by the United States. But even as the United States focuses on Iran's nuclear program, many are also left wondering, why isn't Israel being given the same amount of attention? After all, very little is actually known about Israel's nuclear program. And even the United States in the past has actually been cornered and also questioned about Israel's nuclear plans. Let's tell you what we actually know. What do we know so far? What is available in the public space about the nuclear program? Let's tell you what reports have actually indicated that plutonium has been produced in the Dimona nuclear reactor. Now, this is what reports have suggested, going on to say that it was purchased from France as part of a secret deal. Not much is known, but reports also suggested that plutonium, which is a crucial raw material for atom bombs, was actually taken from France. There is not much information available on Israel's nuclear program, and that's exactly where the entire question comes in. Why is there so much focus on Iran? Do we have enough answers on Israel? That's the question. And this actually brings us to the big questions that we have on the News Hour tonight. Let's get you the big questions. Should America recognize Iran's right to enrich uranium? Is it time that the United States actually recognizes this right of Iran? And is it also time to put an end to the U.S. military bases in the Middle East? Multiple of them have come under attacks. Is it now time to put an end to the U.S. military bases? And should energy trade move away from petrodollars? That's another question. Apart from that, if Israel can actually enrich uranium, why can't the same standard also apply to Iran? And should United States actually stop supporting Israel with weapons? Should the United States pay Iran for the damages that have been caused in the war? This, remember, is one of the conditions that has been laid down by Iran, something that was not acceptable to the United States at all. So the talks have fallen flat. It has been inconclusive. What happens next? And the reason for the talks not really getting to a conclusive end, is it because there are separate yardsticks that have been put in place for Iran versus what has been put in place for Israel? Is this why Iran has also made it clear that it is not going to bow down to the demands of the United States on its nuclear program? Joining us on the broadcast, experts from the field, Ashok Sajanhar, former diplomat. We have Dr. Brahmachaleni, strategic affairs expert, on the broadcast with us. We have Steve Gill, Republican leader, and Barzin Vakmer, Center for Iranian Studies. We also have Mr. Jeremy, former Vice Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and former Israel Ambassador to Germany. We also have Christopher Hale, Democratic strategist, on the broadcast with us on whether largely the issue is on the fact that there are separate yardsticks that have been put in place for Iran as well as Israel, because Iran has been clear that they are not going to give up their nuclear program. Dr. Brahmachaleni, I'll begin with you. There are multiple questions that have been raised, and the US has also made it clear time and again that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear program. But a lot of the resistance that comes in from Iran, is it also because the same yardstick or the same questions are never really asked of Israel?
Well, Israel does have an undeclared nuclear weapons program, in fact, an arsenal. But Israel has a right to possess nuclear weapons, just as India has a right to have a nuclear deterrent. So the issue is not about Israel. The issue is about the double standards in relation to nuclear proliferation. As you pointed out, different yardsticks for different nations. That's the real issue. For example, if you look at Pakistan, which hosted the talks between the US and Iran, Pakistan is the first post-colonial Islamic republic. It developed nuclear weapons tacitly with US support while cultivating terrorist proxies for sustained cross-border warfare. Yet, the US is silent on Pakistan's expanding nuclear weapons program, but it's targeting Iran. It's been targeting Iran for nearly 50 years, ever since the Islamic Revolution. And you know, in the Western literature, when they refer to the Islamic Republic, it always refers to Iran, forgetting that Pakistan is the world's first officially designated Islamic Republic, a country that even today is cited by US government reports as having foreign terrorist organizations on its soil. And yet, the US concern is so muted in relation to Pakistan. And I think that's the bigger issue. That, and the reason why there are different yardsticks is also very important. If a nation state is pliant, is willing to do Washington's bidding, it receives favorable treatment. If a nation is defiant, determined to chart its own path, it receives rough treatment. That's the reason why there are different yardsticks for Iran and for Pakistan.
Okay.
Iran's strategy has been shaped in no small part by the fate of Muammar Gaddafi, who was overthrown and killed in a US-led war in 2011 after abandoning his nuclear ambitions. But this raises a more fundamental question. Iran may have absorbed the lesson of Gaddafi, but did it fail to learn from North Korea? North Korea's Kim Jong-un withdrew from the NPT in 2003 and rapidly developed a minimal nuclear deterrent. Had Iran followed Kim Jong-un's path, would it have faced two major US-Israeli attacks in the span of just 8 months? There was one attack in June last year and one attack that began on February 28th this year. So I think when history is written, Operation Epic Fury will be remembered as a catalyst for Iran's nuclear breakout. Now it's become even more likely that Iran will race toward nuclear breakout. The only viable path to nuclear non-proliferation is always diplomacy, not military force. Military strikes might slow down a nuclear program, but they cannot impose long-term restraint.
But, you know, we started with the United States saying that we want to curtail the nuclear program or end the nuclear program of Iran. Then we heard Trump talk about a regime change. So there have been multiple versions that have come in from the United States on why they started this war in the first place. But Mr. Bazin Wagmer, we spoke about what Iran feels about the negotiations. Iran has also made it clear that it looked like the United States was looking for excuses to exit the negotiating table. But Iran has come under a lot of scrutiny over its nuclear program. Does the yardstick apply equally to Israel? And why not? Why should Iran accept such a yardstick coming in from the United States when it's not applied to Israel?
Because Pahlavi Iran was a signatory to the NPT, an original signatory in 1968, and the Shah ratified it in February 1970. So when the first slew of sanctions were imposed on Tehran in December 2006, and India was at that time at the Security Council and voted in the affirmative to impose those sanctions, it did so from a principled stance because India and Pakistan have not signed the NPT. So they were not hypocrites. They were not running surreptitious nuclear programs, saying one thing and doing something else. That's the basic answer to your question. Both India and Pakistan. Iran had signed it, and still from 2002, when its program was first made known to the outside world, until the first sanctions were imposed in December 2006, that led to the sanctions in question, because it was not a civilian nuclear program, which it was in 1957 under the Eisenhower administration till the revolution in 79. But then what really changed is, one must ask, could it be the fact that after 1979, Iran is the only country in the world which keeps talking about wiping Israel from the arena of time and the face of the map? How is it that Arab countries, and there is an Arab-Israeli imbroglio over the last 8 decades, and there have been some peace moves, but still conflict is rife in the region, Arab countries don't talk about wiping Israel off the map. What is Iran's problem? Why? So then you have to also ask that. What is the problem that the Arabs themselves have with Iran as a colonizing regional hegemon in the region? Prince MBS of Saudi Arabia has made it absolutely plain. The day Tehran gets the bomb, it's only a question of time before we in Riyadh get it. He has been absolutely emphatic about it. And then that is going to set off the region with a nuclear race, because the Arabs are not going to let a regional hegemon like Iran possess the bomb and threaten their security and the regional architecture for times to come, just as what India is regretting today after Pakistan obtained the bomb, because India today has to fight against Pakistani proxies and terrorism, replace that with Iran's regional proxies and terrorists in the region under the nuclear overhang shadow. And India simply has to deal with the fact that Pakistan is a nuclearized state. The Arabs are not going to put up with that in times to come with a nuclearized Iran. So it's got nothing to do with Israel, which we are always fixated about. And rather, let's talk about what the GCC wants and their apprehensions and anxieties since 1979, when Iran has been a disruptor in the Middle East and has wanted to unravel all of these regimes, the traditional monarchies on that side of the Persian Gulf, as part of its radical export of revolution. Let's put these unpleasant facts front, right, and center before talking about Iran's so-called natural right. If Pahlavi Iran had continued as a state, for example, or after the 79 revolution, if Iran had been a normal republic, a normal country in the region, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. But we are not talking about a normal country. We are talking about a rogue state like Pakistan, an insurrectionist state which is committed to spreading murder and mayhem in its near abroad, and also murdering its own citizens at home without any compunction.
Okay, all right. Mr. Christopher Hale, if you can come in here, do you agree with that statement that is being made? Because you have seen, and we know the kind of scrutiny that Natanz and other facilities in Iran have gone through, and this is the claim that is being made by the United States of a potential nuclear program that Iran could have, as opposed to questions being raised on Israel and what it currently possesses.
You know, I think one of the things I find interesting about this conversation is that the fact that the domestic situation here in the United States seems to not be in front of mind when we're talking about this. There has been increasing. We just had new polling out today that this war is very unpopular in the United States, and I think a lot of Americans are asking, why are we even in this situation? Why are the American people participating in this regional battle? And so I think that there's openness to the fact that what is the framework that Iran has been under, that perhaps we should impose the same framework for Israel as well, because we want peace in the entire region. President Trump ran on America first, but this seems to be a Middle East problem. And I think a lot of Americans from the left to the right, I think Steve's party sees it as well. A lot of Americans are wondering why we're getting caught up in this quagmire. We had a week of ceasefire that seems to not have had any impact, and we're going to be at it again. So I think there is openness to a new way of proceeding here, a new way of understanding. Yes, the pressure has been on Iran again and again and again. My party tried in 2015 with the non-proliferation treaty, but of course Israel has never themselves signed any kind of non-proliferation treaty. So I think it's a fair question. You're starting to see in my party in particular here in the United States a desire for a more equal standard between all countries in the Middle East, so that we have a framework, a nuclear framework that every state in the region has to abide by. You know, we can't ask, I don't think, Iran to accept verification, caps, inspections, while Israel operates an undeclared arsenal outside of the non-proliferation treaty with zero accountability. So I think at times on the left here in the United States, we view it as almost a demand for unilateral surrender for Iran, but we're calling it diplomacy. So I think a lot of Americans on the left, and I think increasingly on the right, want to see equal guidelines for Israel, for Iran, and the entire region.
Okay, because we're looking at a situation where the United States has made it clear that there will be fresh attacks, and Iran has also said that US seem to be giving excuses to just go out of the negotiating table. So, Mr. Steve Gill, is that the sense within Republicans as well? Because we've seen past instances of flip-flops from the United States. We've also seen fresh attacks from the United States even as talks were going on. So is peace really possible in Middle East when there are questions that come in on the United States? How can you apply different yardsticks? How can you have different rules for different countries?
Well, first of all, I don't think that any polling I've seen has Americans, unlike what Chris was saying, advocating giving nuclear weapons to everybody in the Middle East. Does that include the Houthis? Does that include Hezbollah, Hamas, Somalia? I definitely don't want Somalia to have nuclear weapons. And I think Iran is a provocateur, has been a provocateur. And as was pointed out earlier, they're the ones in the Middle East shouting, debt to Israel, wipe Israel off the map. Why give offensive capability to a rogue nation that has shown they can't even get along with their neighbors? I think the different yardstick is that, again, you don't have a rogue regime that has been funneling money to terrorists, lying about their ballistic missile capability, saying, oh, it only goes 2,000 kilometers when in fact it goes 4,000, meaning their nuclear weapons could reach Berlin, London, throughout the entire region, despite their claims otherwise. So you cannot trust what Iran is saying, and you certainly cannot trust that they are doing anything peaceful. You don't need 60% enriched uranium for power plants. I'm just glad that at least Iran is now admitting that they are wanting to weaponize and be a nuclear-armed, weaponized nation, and that this lie that they just wanted power has apparently been dispensed. And all of the discussions for 21 hours with J.D. Vance there, one of the folks in the administration who has been opposed to the military conflict, he gave his best effort to get Iran to move off their nuclear weapons demand. The U.S. is not going to agree to that. And frankly, this 1 week, quote, ceasefire, the only ones that ceased firing was the United States for a week. Everybody else has been firing missiles back and forth at each other for the whole week. And I think that after this failed effort to get Iran to act reasonably, I think the U.S. is about to engage again.
Okay, all right. But currently, look at the situation that is unfolding. On one hand, you have Strait of Hormuz, where it is a global supply chain, it's a global lifeline, and things were going on smoothly. Now, days after the war, we're looking at the situation where vessels are not able to move. Global prices are skyrocketing. And Ambassador Sajjanhar, is this for America to control? Strait of Hormuz, a region where the United States now says that we are going to have a role, we are going to blockade this entire region. Is this region for the United States to really have a role and control the movement of the vessels?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prathibha. I guess, the United States is getting engaged in this basically because the whole thing started when this attack started on attacks by the United States and Israel on Iran began on the 28th of February. Before that, the Strait of Hormuz was open and it was functioning, as a normal waterway. There was about 130, 140 ships that were coming out of the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz and going into the Gulf of Oman and into the Arabian Sea. So, this to and fro exchange of commerce was taking place very regularly. But right now we see that after it has been choked, after it has been, Iran has clamped on it, on days there are no ships that are going. And, as everyone knows, 20% of the energy comes out of this. And in addition to that, this is also the waterway for container traffic, for other trade that takes place. So the whole of the supply chains that have been disturbed by this. But of course, it is the whole world, these are international waters, Prathibha. Yes. This is, these are global commons, and all countries have the right of passage of transit through the Strait of Hormuz. So the fact that it has been choked like this, I think this is doing a great disservice as far as the world is concerned, because much of the oil that comes out of that, about 89% of that oil goes to Asia, whether it is to India, it is to China, Japan, ASEAN, etc. Okay. So I think the whole world really needs to get together, because this is a gross violation of the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, of international law. If you permit, I'd like to say just make one more comment on what you've been discussing earlier as to, why Iran, should not have a nuclear weapon. Yes. And this has been the stated position of all the countries. You don't want, this is a very unstable region, West Asia or Middle East, it's a very unstable region. And introduction of one nuclear weapon state will have, repercussions, implications. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all of these will come. And also what we have seen, it's not only in the case of missiles, but, for producing energy, you need up to about 3%, 4% of uranium enrichment. Yes. Why has there been 60% enrichment? And also IAEA reports have suggested that there have been traces that have been found up to 87.6% enrichment of uranium in Iran. So I think there is
kind of scrutiny that comes in from IAEA. The same, Israel is not subjected to the same, which is why such questions come in. But one of the conditions also being put forth by Iran was also for the United States to pay up the damages. I'll come to you in just a moment. Mr. Jeremy wants to come in. Thank you for your patience. Mr. Jeremy, you wanted to come in here amid the questions of whether there has been hypocrisy from the United States. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I would like to come in. I think it's appropriate that the way this panel has been framed, that you're focusing on, on Israel. The one yardstick you need to talk about is Iran, that is member of the NPT and has seriously violated in a serial manner the NPT. It has been a major supporter of terror in the region against Israel, going from supporting major terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis, and two major missile attacks on Israel, direct terror attacks against Israel. That is, first of all, the one yardstick. And, we are not a member of the NPT, just like, I might remind you, India. Yes. And let me just also remind you about the Middle East. We've always said that we want to have security arrangements that are based on direct negotiations between all the sides, based on consensus, and discussing all elements of regional security. It's not just about nuclear weapons. And let me remind you, Israel did not join the NPT, and the Arab countries that did join it, like Syria, like Iraq, like Iran, like Libya, violated it. And Syria also said that once it joins the NPT, it has no entail any relations or obligations towards Israel. So I think, this idea of having a parallel yardstick is completely unacceptable. Israel has never threatened anyone with nuclear weapons. We've pursued a very responsible policy in this regard. And I think that the focus you need to stay on is on Iran and how it has evaded all of its being the only member of the NPT to enrich uranium to 60%. That's the thing you should consider. And maybe also the fact that Pakistan is running these negotiations and probably coordinating a lot with Iran, which I would imagine might also be of concern to India.
Okay. Because under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran does have the right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, which is the claim that they have been making. But I take your point. I take your point that Iran has signed the NPT. I want to bring in Dr. Brahmachaleni on the questions that have been raised on Strait of Hormuz and the way the global supply chains have been affected. Dr. Brahmachaleni, is the crisis that is currently unfolding really testing the petrodollar system with the situation that we're currently looking at? Is that how you see it proceeding, with questions being raised, with nations now thinking of moving on from the petrodollar system?
This could be the one outcome of this present crisis. For example, Iran now charging in Chinese yuan. Until the Russian invasion of Ukraine, almost 100% of the global oil trade was denominated in US dollars. That figure has now come down to 60% in just a matter of 4 years or so. But now the latest developments indicate that the petrodollar dominance is going to further erode accidentally, not by design by the US, but as one of the unintended consequences of this needless war. But on the larger issue of Iran, it's quite sloppy to call, especially for Indians, to call Iran part of the Middle East without realizing that Iran is India's maritime neighbor. Geographically, Iran is far closer to India by sea than to Israel by land. Yet, the prospect of a nuclear-armed India, or a nuclear-armed Iran, whether real or perceived, has stirred little anxiety in India over the years. You never have this kind of hysterical reaction in India about Iran developing nuclear weapons. You have to ask yourself why. Why is it? Because India is already uniquely situated between two nuclear-armed neighbors, China and Pakistan.
Yes.
No other country in the world is wedged between two nuclear-armed neighbors. In fact, these two nuclear-armed neighbors, China and Pakistan, are close allies. They've been close allies for more than 60 years now. And there are two reasons why Iran-related nuclear question doesn't rattle India. First, unlike Israel, India has trusted IAEA and other independent assessments that Iran has not moved to build a nuclear weapon. The IAEA repeatedly has asserted periodically, every 6 months, it releases a report. And even the last report it released said categorically that it has no indication, no conclusion of any undeclared nuclear activity in Iran. Second reason is that unlike Israel, India does not see Iran as an adversary, despite occasional hostile rhetoric from Iran. When the late Supreme Leader, who was assassinated, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, when he made these critical comments about India's Kashmir problem, it did inflame passions in India, but it was forgotten because India and Iran historically have had a close relationship, and India's approach to Iran is fundamentally different from Israel's.
Mr. Jeremy, on the current situation where we are seeing the statements coming in from Trump, bringing our attention back to what is currently happening, the negotiations clearly didn't work, but we've seen multiple claims that have been made by the US President Donald Trump, including the end of civilization in Iran. He has now again said that the military is locked and loaded. Does it seem like the United States is losing the narrative war as far as the negotiations are concerned, and how do you see things proceeding from here on?
Look, first of all, regarding the previous speaker, I think he should read also closer the IEA reports when it said a number of times that the IEA can no longer guarantee that the activities are designed for peaceful purposes. And that's something that I would definitely not just skip over. Second of all, look, and I'd also suggest that the amount of material that has been enriched in Iran is in the several thousands of uranium at different levels. Obviously, the 440 kilos of 60%, but there's also several thousand at the level of 3.67% and 20%. Now, regarding the negotiations, I think it's still too early. I would imagine in all the negotiations I've been involved in, the first day always is very intense. People come with their maximalist positions. And then I would see a situation where people will go back to their capitals, assess where did we agree and where did we disagree, and try and see are there any zones of potential agreement. And that's why I would still urge, I mean, look, people have said it, I'm not the only one. The JCPOA took 2 years to negotiate. The Iranians know how to negotiate. They invented the rug merchant philosophy. They are very serious negotiators, and this thing won't be over in one day. You need to see that there's a potential within 2 weeks to move from the first day to begin to create some sort of framework for the continuation of a more detailed negotiation. That would be the more realistic thing to discuss. Regarding Hormuz, that's a major issue, which I would defer to the other experts on the panel.
Okay, Mr. Berzin, since we are talking about the Strait of Hormuz, the war, how it began and where it's going currently, let's take a look at the bigger picture as well. With the way things are going currently, does it look like we're looking at a new world order? And should the Arab nations also be looking at their security alliances, considering that multiple US bases have now come under attack?
And if anything, Dr. Anwar Gargash, former UAE foreign minister and the most senior diplomat in the UAE, mentioned only a few days ago that once the dust settles on all this, we are going to, and I quote, double down on our military alliance with the United States because that is the only country we can bank upon. So all this talk about strategic hedging and finding prospective partners is absolutely pie-in-the-sky thinking. Do you think the Arabs are going to go with China, for instance, which has aided and abetted Tehran in real-time intelligence for military assets and has been supporting China with ammonium perchlorate, which is an integral component for solid propellant fuel rockets? The Arabs have not taken lightly to what China has played out in this nearly 40-day war. Mark my words, it will affect the relations with China. So all this talk about a de-dollarization world and a BRICS world is complete nonsense as far as I'm concerned, even before this war. And some inconsistencies I want to mention. On 1st June 2025, that was 24 days before the 12-day war with Israel, Director General Rafael Grossi formally informed the agency, IAEA, and 19 out of 35 members found Tehran wanting. It was found wanting, as Jeremy mentions, that there was not only just the breakout period had come very close with the 60% of 440.9 kilos, but also surreptitious sites hitherto unknown. Kolan Gazla site next to Natanz, 2 miles from Natanz, the Turkuzabad site in South Tehran that was passed off as a carpet cleaning factory and where radioisotopes were subsequently found. And Iran has not offered explanations on this among so many other surreptitious sites. So work has been going on of which the IAEA simply doesn't know. Then you talk about the natural waterway. Muscat wants to have nothing to do with Tehran on sharing revenue proceeds by blackmailing the world and submitting every vessel to a $2 million charge, because the guards have realized that if they were to do that, they can tot up $110 billion annually and that somehow that could be used for reparations for Iran. And we do know what Iran does whenever funds comes its way, as indeed with unfrozen assets it's received after the JCPOA. For example, the 1.3 billion in interest accrued over pre-79 weapon sales from the Shah days, and so on and so forth. All that was expended on keep bolstering Bashar Assad's regime and on funding Houthis, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the PMU, Iraq, Ashaib al-Kataib, Shia mobilization units, and the works. Iran never spends this on its own economy, which explains why it's become a basket case economy, and it's reeling under 112% food inflation today. And finally, the last point, the Strait of Hormuz is a natural waterway. Charging tolls in the Suez Canal is a different question altogether. And indeed, Egypt does that because it's an artificial waterway since 1869. The same cannot apply to this natural waterway that Iran has decided to blackmail one and all, particularly the Asian region, because it is going to affect its diplomatic relations with everyone in not just the Middle East, but also Asia. I mean, how much can Iran do to put everyone off in the region is the question. How far is it willing to do that as a, quite frankly, pariah state?
Okay, so, you know, a lot of the situation, would you say the United States is also responsible for it because things were going on smoothly, and then we have a situation here currently where the entire world is suffering, and, you know, we're seeing the situation week after week where markets are tumbling?
Was offered civilian nuclear fuel. The talks broke down on 28th February, which Secretary Rubio mentioned. We offered them all the civilian nuclear fuel you want in the world, because yes, Iran does have an energy crisis. Granted, they are rationing petrol, but they refused to accept civilian nuclear guarantees because their intentions were not honorable.
Okay, Mr. Christopher, what does a truly fair nuclear deal actually look like? And with the way things are going currently, are we looking at a situation where the Middle East is going towards greater militarization, and who benefits from such a situation? Mr. Christopher, can you unmute yourself? Yes, go on.
My apologies.
Yes.
I think clearly the United States is the one that does not benefit from the situation first and foremost. I want to go back to the idea of, you talked about a fair nuclear agreement. I think it's one that allows the United States to go home and not have to participate in yet again another Middle East operation. And I think that there's really growing pressure. We were talking about whether or not President Trump will come back to the negotiation table. I think he will. I think it's actually, I think Steve can answer this next, but I think it's absolutely in President Trump's interest to wind this down. You know, we were told in June last year that we had annihilated, that word's been used quite a bit over the past few weeks, so we had annihilated Iran's nuclear capabilities, and yet here we are again. And so I think that we need to come to a situation where U.S. intervention is not needed, is not desired, is not acted upon. And so I think that there is going to be increasing pressure. I think J.D. Vance is coming home to a country that wants him to get back on that plane and end this war. So I think the political pressure here at home is towards any kind of arrangement that doesn't involve us putting boots on the ground, doesn't involve us policing the world, doesn't involve us being militarily involved in the Middle East. And I think everyone around the table agrees that that is the desire for all parties involved. And so any way that we can get to that, I think is going to be imperative for the administration to pursue. And I think it's going to be in Trump's best interest, and I think it's going to be in the region's best interest as well.
Okay, all right. Let's see what happens. The next few days are going to be extremely crucial. We'll have to leave it at that. Thanking all guests for joining us on the broadcast with their expertise.